Today's story was written by Reddit user MackFenzie. Vala had gotten involved in the human Venlil cultural share program early on, and quickly realised that simply getting to know the predators made them seem less frightening and monstrous. As an aspiring filmmaker, she knew inspiration when it hit her. She had requested transport to Earth as soon as it was available. On Earth, Vala had been assigned a suitably screened human, small of stature, female, and a plant eater. Katie and Vala had both been nervous and excited to meet each other, but so far the relationship had gone well. Vala had already had the opportunity to master her instinctive fear of the human's vicious visages. After all, even after the Battle of Earth, the two women had fallen into a comfortable routine. Today they were visiting a museum. On Halloween, a local teenage boy had unintentionally frightened Vala with his dinosaur costume and invited them to visit his favourite museum for a tour so that Vala could learn more about the extinct Earth creatures. Katie had managed to arrange a tour with the child as their guide through his extracurricular volunteer program. Even though Vala knew that humans weren't the vicious predators everyone once feared they might be, she was occasionally still caught by surprise that they were so committed to fostering curiosity and learning in their young. She knew that the information humans had on dinosaurs were from the fossil record, which meant that she would be going to a museum to look at the decomposed and mineralized corpses of long-dead creatures. How awfully predatory! Vala felt her stomachs rolling in anxious anticipation. While she had successfully faced her fear on Halloween night, she worried the museum would prove more than her instincts could handle. She didn't really feel confident about her decision to make a video on the topic. But her viewers had clamoured for more information on the dinosaurs, so she had committed herself to find out more. Commenters seemed desperate for more information about the near-mythical, extinct beasts that seemed so frighteningly similar to the Aurochsaur. Some guessed that the human fascination with them was a predator's cult to a superior ancient predator race, while others were keen to learn more about the alien human approach to biology and science. Many simply seemed to find the adolescent human's clear enthusiasm for the historical creatures endearing and wanted to see him on screen. All Vala needed to do to perform better than the last time she had come face to face with dinosaur imagery was not to hide under a couch. Surely she can do that. The museum probably wouldn't even have couches. Katie and Vala boarded the bus to what had once been downtown. They then took the shuttle that looped around the area that locals had started calling the Rubble, and finally boarded a third bus that would take them to the museum. The building that housed the museum was grand in architecture. Its great columns and stately form reminded Vala of the historical mansions in the capital of Venlil Prime. Katie pointed out a pair of humans standing at the entrance to the museum as they approached. There's Mike, and that must be his mother, Ashley. Vala felt a wave of relief that the child was not wearing his dinosaur costume at the time, although his torso covering did have an image of a dinosaur printed upon it. Ashley shook Vala's hand and stared directly into her eyes. "Vala, it is such a pleasure to meet you. I was so proud of Mikey when I got Katie's call that you were interested in interviewing him at the museum for your show. He's always loved dinosaurs, you know. Thank you so much for agreeing to let us get this tour. I hope you weren't waiting too long. We still can't figure out the schedule for the Rubble shuttle." Ashley shook her head and started to tell them it was no problem, but her son calmly interrupted her. "We arrived an hour early to ensure we wouldn't be late." Ashley gave him a look that Vala couldn't interpret. "But it's alright, Mikey likes to make sure we're ahead of schedule, but we were more than happy to wait. He's so excited to give you his tour." Mikey nodded. In comparison to his mother's concentrated gaze, he stared at the air just over Vala's shoulder. She made a mental note to thank him for being so thoughtful. He must have researched Venlil customs and decided not to stare at her face in order to make her more comfortable. Katie smiled and asked him if he'd like to lead the way into the museum. Vala directed a camera at the intricately carved stonework that made up the museum. "We lost so much in the bombing," Katie said solemnly. "We're lucky this survived." As they walked in, Vala hoped the scale of the place would be conveyed properly on camera. It was enormous, even by human standards. Just seeing this place felt like proof that human culture contained immense value outside the violence and predation the Federation claimed was humanity's sole legacy. Only a few months previously, Vala herself would not have believed such lofty pursuits as building magnificent palaces for the tending and growth of knowledge to be possible in a society of predators. Mike gestured to a large archway to his right. "We're about to walk into the Grand Hall. Before we go in, Vala, I want to tell you some paleontology basics. Dinosaurs lived 230 to 66 million years ago. Because they died so long ago, the only way we know about them is from the fossil record. Fossils are not bones. That's a common misconception. Fossils are the preserved remains of an ancient organism, which forms stone by replacing the organic tissue over time. So, in the museum, you will see displays of fossils and replicas of fossils, as well as models showing what we think dinosaurs might have looked like in life." "Thank you, Mike. Katie warned me that I would be seeing bones today." "Fossilized bones," Mike quickly corrected. "But yes, I believe it may be disturbing to you, but it is important to step outside of our comfort zone at times." "He get the comfort zone line from you," Katie whispered to the boy's mother, grinning. "I feel like I have to whip it out every single time we want to do something that deviates from the routine," Ashley whispered back with a smile. Vala focused her attention back to her camera and the archway in front of her. As she rounded the corner to be able to see through the opening, she gasped, and her tail involuntarily straightened in shock. The hall inside was even larger, and centered in the room was an imposing figure made of bones, or, as Mike had preemptively explained, fossils. It was at least 3 times taller than the boy who had led them into the room. Her ears folded themselves back on her head involuntarily. She was oddly grateful for its skeletal form, since her brain wasn't tempted to interpret it as a literal threat. But it was simply so alien, strange, nightmarish. Curved teeth the length of her arm filled a jaw that had been propped open in a perpetual roar. Similar specimens filled the entirety of her peripheral vision, even suspended overhead. "This is Frank, our Tyrannosaurus Rex." Mike gestured grandly at the large thing. He probably did not literally have a name, because there is no evidence that dinosaurs were capable of language. But humans like to name and personify everything, so the museum gave him the name Frank. Vala's ear, still flattened back in discomfort, somehow managed to twitch in amusement. The adolescent's detail-oriented, matter-of-fact dissemination of information was adorable. "Now, I want to warn you, this may be upsetting to you due to your cultural values, but it is a fact that Tyrannosaurus Rex was a carnivore, a meat-eater, as you can see by his large sharp teeth and claws. He would have been an intimidating hunter in his lifetime, about 68 million years ago." "How do you know how long ago it lived?" Vala asked curiously. "Carbon dating, right?" Katie guessed. "Not carbon dating, no. That's a common misconception," Mike answered. "Carbon dating can only be used on items that are less than 50,000 years old. The method used to date dinosaur fossils is called radiometric dating. Scientists use a mass spectrometer to measure the ratio of stable to unstable isotopes in a sample, and then calculate the age of the sample based off of the half-life of those isotopes." Vala's ears twisted in confusion. "I don't think I understand. Do you know about how unstable atoms will shed neutrons until they become stable?" Vala nodded assent. "So we can't predict when a specific atom will go from being unstable to stable, but we do know how long it will take half of a group of atoms to shed their excess neutrons and go from being unstable to being stable. That's called the half-life. We can use that knowledge to do math to figure out the age of a sample based on the ratio of stable to unstable atoms in the sample. Vala's tail swished deliberately as she considered. If it's based off of physics and chemistry, then that process should work on other planets, right? Our historians could learn the same types of historical information about our world. I would be shocked if alien paleontologists and archaeologists do not use these techniques, Mike blurted. Perhaps not everyone knows about the details. It is important to remember that not everyone shares my special interest. But if researchers on other planets don't have the ability to reliably date artifacts, then I would have serious doubts on the accuracy of their findings and theories. Vala wasn't a historian, but she had certainly never heard of this type of dating process. But Mike was right. She probably just hadn't learned about the state-of-the-art historical research methods in her history class in school. That didn't mean they weren't using these techniques. It would be absurd to think humans could have more advanced research technology than the Federation. The Predators had only left their own solar system within the past year, after all, and the Federation was made up of hundreds of species, all with incredibly rich histories and cultures. Vala just needed to do some research on her own people's methods to provide context for any other viewers who might share her ignorance. Now, over here is Fran the Triceratops. She would have lived at about the same time T-Rex did, about 67 million years ago. Triceratops were herbivores, plant eaters, just like you, which you can see by the fact that their teeth are shaped somewhat similarly to yours, although a lot larger. He laughed loudly, and Katie snorted behind him. Us humans have lots of teeth that are shaped like that too, she added, glancing at Vala's camera, since plants are such an important part of our diet. As they continued towards the rear of the Grand Hall, Vala zoomed in on a display of some smaller fossils that were vaguely circular, with a mesmerizing whirling centre. Mike helpfully explained that they were ammonites, extinct aquatic mollusks. An artistic rendition of what they might have looked like in life showed a creature with multiple tentacles, like if a Colossian had been squished uncomfortably into a shell with only their tentacles and eyes poking out. Vala shook her head to banish the disturbing image and reminded herself these creatures were long extinct and completely unrelated to the Colossians. Katie pointed upwards, and Vala startled. Had the humans captured a crocodile and left their mutilated corpse in a museum? Oh, of course not. That would be ridiculous. Mike was cheerfully explaining that it was a petrosaur, which was apparently not technically a dinosaur, but a flying reptile. Vala decided to stop thinking and just concentrate on keeping her camera steady, regardless of the bizarre displays around her. They still had a whole museum to tour after all, and her mind was already spinning like the ammonite shells. After 2 hours of what felt like non-stop information from Mike and constant visual input from every corner of the museum, Katie suggested they stop in the gift shop and then go out for lunch. Ashley tugged her son to the side. "Would you like to go into the gift shop, Mikey, or would you like a sensory break?" she asked him quietly. "I want to sit over there," he said, pointing out a secluded corner. "Okay, honey. Do you want me to come sit with you, or do you want space?" "Space," he said shortly, and immediately walked to his designated spot, put headphones in, and sat. Ashley rejoined Kate and Vala and smiled brightly. "Mikey's going to sit down for a few minutes while we browse." "Just us ladies then," Kate exclaimed. "Will he be okay by himself?" Vala asked. He was a juvenile after all, and children shouldn't be allowed to isolate. "Oh, he's perfectly safe in the museum, and we're right nearby if he needs us," Ashley said, as if it were completely normal to leave a young one alone. Vala reluctantly followed the human women into the gift shop. Katie agonized over whether she wanted a pink or black torso covering with an image of a Tyrannosaurus rex fossil. Vala noticed a display of glossy paper photos of some of the museum displays, and carefully selected an artistic rendition of what the herbivores Triceratops might have looked like in life. She couldn't imagine her family's horror if she tried to show them an image of the fossilized bones. Purchases in hand, they collected the teenager and walked to a nearby restaurant. Vala could hardly wait to sit down after 2.5 hours of walking, not that the humans seemed to even notice the physical exertion. The eatery was comfortingly crowded and full of happy conversation. After the deathly quiet of the museum, Vala felt relieved to be back in a larger herd, even if it was in a room full of humans rather than other Venlil. "How did you come to learn so much about dinosaurs? You are incredibly knowledgeable," Vala asked Mike. "Dinosaurs are my special interest," he explained. "I've always loved them. My room is all dinosaurs. I have 134 dinosaur figures and 207 dinosaur books. I like to watch documentaries about paleontology in my free time, and my mum and I visit lots of dinosaur museums." Vala's tail wagged cheerfully. "That is impressive. I didn't realise human children had such devoted focus to one specific interest. Most Venlil children need to be encouraged to focus their interests as they grow." "Most human kids don't have a special interest the same way I do. I'm autistic, so my special interest is more important to me than a regular hobby. But not all humans are like that." "Autistic?" Vala asked. "I don't think that word translated." "Autism is a neurological condition," Ashley answered. "It has to do with the hardwiring in your brain, and it's something you can learn to manage. So, together, Mikey and I have learned how to overcome his specific challenges. It's different for every autistic person, which is why we call it the autism spectrum. It means I process social interaction, communication, and other stimulus different than other humans that don't have autism," Mike added. "Like, most humans find reading human body language instinctively easy, but for me, it is something I have to concentrate to do. Or like how I took a sensory break after our tour to help me not get sensory overload." Vala's ears retreated backwards on her head. "Difficulty with body language, requiring isolation? You have predator's disease." In her peripheral vision, she saw Katie's eyes widen and Ashley straighten and move towards her son. "Excuse me? What the hell did you just say?" Ashley hissed, angling herself as if to shield her child. Katie grabbed Vala's arm tightly. "Vala, predator's disease is not a thing here, and it is a really, really offensive idea to suggest, especially about a kid. You need to apologize and explain you got confused because your culture is different than ours." Vala's ears were practically glued to her head with confusion and anxiety. I'm sorry," she stammered. There is a neurological condition many of the Federation species can suffer called predator's disease, and I just thought it sounded similar. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend." Mike nodded calmly. "That's all right. I've read that there are hundreds of differences between Venlil culture and ours. Some cultural misunderstandings are inevitable." "But no," his mother added tightly, "autism is not a disease, predator or not. It is just a difference." Vala had grown accustomed to the human gaze, but under the hot glare Ashley had pinned on her, she could feel her tail tucking itself between her legs. "My apologies," Vala said again. "I shouldn't have mentioned the similarity to such a stigmatized disease. That was as thoughtless as a late spring frost. Mike, you have been such a wonderful tour guide. Thank you." "You're welcome for the tour. It was my pleasure. What is predator's disease? Is it stigmatized because of your cultural beliefs around meat consumption?" Ashley's frown deepened. "Honey, that's a very interesting question, and I love your curiosity, but I'm feeling a little anxious talking about the Venlil predator disease. Would it be alright if we did some research on it at home later, if you're that interested in it? Maybe we can talk more about dinosaurs over lunch." "Yes, please," Katie said with forced enthusiasm. "You were so professional on our tour, we didn't get a chance to get personal. So, what is your favourite dinosaur, and why?" "Katie," Vala asked when they were back home, "did you know about autism?" "Yes, of course. It's pretty common." "What are the symptoms?" Mike said he didn't understand his own people's body language, but what else? Mike didn't say he doesn't understand body language. He said he just has to work harder to process body language than many people do. I suppose that's true. I did notice he was very polite in making sure he wasn't staring directly at me, the way most humans do. Katie blinked at her. "Well, that's one common trait of autism, is that they tend to avoid eye contact." "Oh," Vala frowned. "That's nothing like predator's disease then." "What is predator's disease? You seemed startled when Mike mentioned his autism. But other than the name, which, again, sounds really offensive from our perspective, I don't know anything about it. It's a mental disorder that causes people to not act like people, devoid of empathy. We screen for it in early childhood to make sure they don't get a chance to harm their communities. Katie's eyebrows snapped together. What could they be looking for in kids that young? Children who prefer isolation, don't understand verbal cues, can't relate to others, express disgust at physical touch. Things that show they aren't capable of being part of a herd. Katie's eyebrows shot up to her hairline. What happens to those kids? Vala flicked her ears in a shrug. I'm not really sure. They're removed so they can't be a threat to society. Removed? You disappear, kids? Katie asked, a strangled quality in her voice. Because they aren't comfortable hugging? Or have to work harder to learn to tell the difference between the 50 most identical ear flicks? Because they might just want alone time every once in a while? Just because they're different? Vala's ears retreated to her skull again. You don't understand. Those things might be normal for you. You're predators. We're prey. For us, they are abnormal traits that show a predilection for violence. It's called predator's disease for a reason. Katie shook her head in disbelief. Wow! The legendary Federation empathy at work. And that's what you think we should do to awesome kids like Mike? The human's shoulders slumped and she turned slowly. She didn't even seem to listen to Vala's response, only walked away. Vala ran after her and poured out her hand to try to stop her so she could explain properly. Katie shook her off and closed her bedroom door roughly. Vala wasn't sure what had happened. How could anyone argue against keeping people safe from those with dangerous neurological conditions? Humans might be predators, but they were still social creatures. Surely they should recognize the threat posed by a condition that caused people to not be like other people. She sat and pulled out her holopad. She was exhausted from their long excursion, but Katie had never been upset at her before. Vala needed more information so she could make Katie understand how predator's disease was nothing like Mike's benign autism. She needed her to understand that keeping people safe from predators was an objectively good thing, even if the predators looked like normal children from the outside. The problem was, it looked like if Mike had been born on Venlil, he would indeed have been diagnosed with predator's disease and taken away. Vala found arguments penned by individual doctors arguing that predator's disease should be split into multiple disorders, some of which they claimed were benign. Official sources, however, that the risk that would represent to society was too great. The current system was the kindest possible way to handle the disorder. Details on what the current system actually was were worryingly scarce. She found plenty of material on predator attacks and frightening accounts of diseased individuals harrowing the people until exterminators were able to dispatch the problem. She couldn't find much of anything about what happened to people who were suffering from the disease, especially the children who were identified in their annual predator disease screenings. Vala tried tens of different search queries. She looked at the public access Cerulean medical pages, the Venlil government pages, the interspecies non-profit pages. She even spent a painful amount of money on a temporary subscription to the Nevok Encyclopedic Network, which promised to solve her search problems fast. It did not. As her faith in her people's medical and psychiatric knowledge failed to bear fruit, Vala felt the sting of Katie's sarcasm over the Federation's empathy grow. Vala's ancestors had been part of the Federation since Katie's were still bludgeoning each other with rocks. The Venlil, in particular, were known for their empathy. Humanity had empathy, of course. The tests had proven that. But focus, Vala. Read the next article. Communities harbouring diseased individuals may find it difficult to enforce predators' disease screenings and treatments. Not everyone may recognise the image of evil when it is in front of them, wearing the guise of a small child. And yet, the threat a diseased child bears to its community is far greater than any predatory animal. Vala read the article as if it were narrated by an elderly Colossian. It sounded just like Chief Niconas, actually. If we fail at our duty to remove the disease, they can easily disintegrate into the community. We keep the peace and give the grotesque a chance at normalcy. Vala's brain unhelpfully stopped paying attention to her reading, and instead received its file on Chief Nikonus. She could see the Colossian politician's face in her mind's eye, gloating as he told a vomiting Captain Sovlin that his people had once been predators. This has nothing to do with predator's disease, she tried to tell herself, but her mind just spun. She could practically hear Katie whispering, "Legendary Federation empathy at work. You disappear kids just because they're different. Awesome kids like Mike." Mike's voice joined the confusing chatter reverberating in her skull. I would have serious doubts on the accuracy of their findings and theories. The Federation had been wrong about humanity. There had been 1,000 years of tampering and deception that were only uncovered by that Harchin reporter's unparalleled bravery. What other wrongs could her people be doing? What other lies had Vala been taught?